And hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Iceberg podcast, brought to you as always by Inside the Penguins, a proud affiliate of the Hockey News. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Nick Horwat. We got a fun show for you guys today. It's always fun whenever we actually get some news to talk about, and we have talked a little bit about the three signings that they made earlier this week, but we got to talk about it in a context where what's next for the Penguins now, especially on defense, as they sign both a left and right-handed shot defenseman earlier this week. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the center ice position because the free agents available are not plentiful. So the ones that are there options for the Penguins to fill their third line center role. And then we'll close it out with a little bit of news about Jaromir Jagr. Is he coming back to Pittsburgh? It seems like that is on the mind of the Penguins organization. So we'll talk about that to close out the show. But Horwat, before we get into that, did you watch game one last night? Florida Panthers take down the New York Rangers. Did you get any of that action?
I caught some of it. Excuse me. I caught some of it. I caught the last two periods, which I believe were probably the better ones anyway. Matthew Tkachuk is a monster. Saw what he did in the first to kick off the scoring. And then, just the Rangers couldn't beat Bobrovsky. It was only his second career playoff shutout I've seen, which is astonishing considering, he hasn't had the most playoff success over his career, but he's just been around for a long time and has led teams to postseasons plenty of times before. And also no shutouts last season, I guess, unless that first one came last year. I don't remember. I would assume his first one came against the Penguins against Columbus, honestly. I know it didn't happen often, but I would assume his first would have been then. But the Panthers got up 1-0, and honestly, what did I say? 6 games for that? 6.
You did.
Yeah, that's looking good so far.
Yeah, after one game, you're in the driver's seat there. So Florida Panthers up 1-0. Edmonton Oilers and Dallas Stars kick off their series for the Western Conference Finals later this evening. But let's talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins. They checked off some more boxes this week, re-signing Jack St. Ivany, re-signing forward Jonathan Gruden, and then bringing in Finnish Pro League defenseman Philip Kral, who has some ties to general manager Kyle Dubas, was actually part of Kyle Dubas' first ever draft as an NHL general manager back in 2018. He was a 5th round pick of the Toronto Maple Leafs. So before we get into what this means going forward, Horwat, what were your thoughts on these three signings in general?
Good pieces of business, all three of them. It's a couple of returning players in St. Ivany and Gruden, both again on 2-way deals, which is going to be a solid piece, which is again easily a solid piece of work to have that maneuverability. Jack St. Ivany is going to come in as the leader of the clubhouse for that third line right side role. And Jonathan Gruden can return as that depth option of maybe he gets recalled every so often, maybe he doesn't, maybe he spends the season at the AHL level again, maybe he sees some NHL time, assuming he'll see NHL time for sure. Just a matter of where he starts the season. Just good pieces of business on those two returns. And when it comes to Philip Kral, I think genuinely considering, and we can get into it in a little bit of detail here, if nothing else, it's a good depth addition for, again, that maneuverability, 2-way deal to maybe slot into the NHL lineup every so often if need be, or continue to grow his game at the AHL level, and then maybe another. It's only a 1-year deal, so we'll see what comes out of that. But maybe it turns into a couple of years down the line if he grows back in the system again. Like you said, he's been away for a year. I believe it was the Swedish league.
What was it, the Swedish league?
SM Liga with the Pelicans. That might be Finland.
I think that's Finland.
Well, then Google lied to me. But that being said, coming back to North America, he's got to regrow into the game and shouldn't take long for him. He had a lot of upside whenever he was with the Toronto Maple Leafs organization. Again, there's the connection there. Kyle Dubas, if he knows a player or knows a front office face, he's going to give you a call. And the same thing sort of happened here. I think Philip Kral has a good chance of being a good piece for the Penguins.
When I looked at Kral, I looked at him as kind of a similar situation to another guy we're going to talk about here in a couple minutes in Ryan Shea, somebody that you bring in that hasn't had a lot of NHL experience, and Shea's instance, it was no NHL experience, but a lot of American Hockey League experience. But you bring in a young guy that could play at the American Hockey League level for you next year, simply because you look at what they had on the left side before they signed Krall, especially at that American League level. It's Owen Pickering, who has only had a couple cups of coffee at the American Hockey League level. It's Isaac Beliveau, who spent 70 of his 72 games played at the ECHL level. And it's Emil Pieniniemi, who played all year over in the Finnish league last season. So there's nobody that has a full season of AHL experience down there in the minors to this point. You bring in a guy that's going to be able to fill out that roster that's still only 24 years old. So maybe he can catch on and be something for the Penguins left side, especially a left side that we've talked about a couple times this offseason already. There's a lot of question marks, and we can talk about it with Ryan Shea. We can talk about it with P.O. Joseph here in a minute, but Ryan Graves is still a massive question mark. Are they going to keep him on the roster? And then even Marcus Pettersson, while there's no question about his play, and I talked about this a couple times this week, there's no question about his play. He is going into a contract season, whether he actually makes it to the season without a contract extension or not. At this moment, there's no future for Marcus Pettersson beyond next season, at least in writing. So there are some question marks on that left side. So I think Krall sees that and sees an opportunity in Pittsburgh where this team wants to get younger, and he at 24 years old on a left side that has a lot of question marks could get himself an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. The way I look at it is that he has a real chance, because you mentioned each of those names on the left side that kind of stack up in front of him on the depth chart right now: Pettersson, Graves, Joseph. You could throw John Ludwig in there if you really wanted to, and Ryan Shea. Yeah, Ryan Shea just doesn't have a deal. Maybe it's just he just takes the walk. He's only going to be a UFA. He can maybe find something elsewhere. John Ludwig's going to start the season injured, so that position is already sort of settled for him. We know he's going to have to fight during season to get back in the lineup. And when P.O. Joseph and Ryan Graves, for what it's worth, I mean, Joseph doesn't have a contract, but is an RFA, could be dealt. You never know what's going to happen there. He was reportedly on the block or looking for a change of scenery around the trade deadline, and maybe the Penguins kind of go back to that this offseason to give him a better boost, because P.O. Joseph has NHL talent. He can do it. Maybe just the pieces aren't aligning here in Pittsburgh. Despite him playing first-line minutes, it just might not work. And for Ryan Graves, the Penguins just need to find a way out of it. Suddenly, you're looking at the depth chart as Marcus Pettersson, injuries, Philip Krall.
Yeah.
Oh, so now all of a sudden he could start the season as a third guy, barring any more additions, any more moves, this, that, the other. I mean, at the moment, he's deep down there. He's got some ways to fight. But if those things that I mentioned sort of happen, next thing you know, he could be a shoo-in for a starting spot in the NHL lineup come game one, which isn't totally terrible. He has NHL experience before, and this wouldn't be totally off from what the Penguins did last year with Ryan Shea. Here's a guy who has no NHL experience, but a ton in the A, and they give him a roster spot right out of camp. If that happens again this year, I wouldn't be shocked. It seems to be a Kyle Dubas thing.
Yeah, not only that, I think the hurdles aren't too high to climb for Philip Krall, at least at the moment. But I think we both expect that there are certainly many more moves to come this offseason from Kyle Dubas and the Pittsburgh Penguins. And that brings us to a couple of the guys that you already mentioned here. Let's start with Ryan Shea. Do you think they bring back Ryan Shea after that 1-year experimental deal where he made the team out of camp? Kind of surprising to everybody. Whenever he was going in, he wasn't a name that a lot of people had mentioned. And then he built his name throughout training camp, had a decent starting stint with the Penguins, and then struggled a little bit, went back to the American Hockey League, formed a bond with St. Ivany, and really took advantage of that down the stretch.
I wouldn't be shocked either way with what happens with Ryan Shea. I think one of the holdups would be is that Kyle Dubas might try and be a little smarter and sign more two-way deals this year, whereas it was a bunch of one-ways, it was a bunch of NHL contracts last year, i.e. Ryan Shea was an NHL contract. He had to shove him through waivers. And no one took him. We're sitting here today, and he's on the team, and he's made it through the team. But if you're talking to Ryan Shea now, it's, hey, we gave you a full NHL deal last year. Can you take a two-way this year? That's not going to be a great move for him. Where you have to jump in with all of that or something.
I was just going to say one-way, two-way doesn't have an effect on waivers. That's a completely different thing. But that's just a matter of how much money you make. If it's two-way, if it's two-way, you make a different amount of money in the American Hockey League, the NHL. If it's one-way, it's just one flat number, whether you're playing NHL or AHL hockey.
Okay, and they still have to fire him through waivers though, which I
They
mean,
do. Yeah, he's still a waiver eligible
yep.
player. Yes.
So I mean, maybe if you give him that option of one way, two way, maybe he just doesn't want to be part of whatever in this situation. Just it's going to be up to the player, the agent, and I wouldn't be shocked either way with what happens with Ryan Shea here. If he returns to the team again, it wouldn't be in a huge role, so it's no harm, no foul. If he leaves, they got the options to replace. It's not going to be super difficult, whether it be within the organization or without. The only issue is a lot of the depth when it comes to the left side and the right side. It's all junior players.
Yeah. And I think the thing with Ryan Shea is he's not a bad 7th or 8th defenseman. But where the Penguins are at right now is they have 6 NHL defensemen under contract, right? You have Carlson, Letang, Pettersson, Jack St. Ivany now. I'll put it into that camp. Did I miss anybody? Ryan Graves and John Ludwig. Yeah, there's your 6. And even if Ludwig misses the first, week or 2 of the season, that's 6 of the 7 guys that you finished last season with. You can't run back this same defense. So if you're bringing back Ryan Shea, I don't hate it as a depth move, but I think there's going to need to be some changes made because you look at where the Penguins were last year defensively, they weren't good for the majority of the season. Even at the beginning of the year, where the Penguins were one of the better teams in goals allowed in the National Hockey League, that was because Tristan Jarry and Alex Nedeljkovic were standing on their heads through the first 3 months of the season. And then whenever Jarry took a back seat following, the turn of the new year, you saw that start to decline again and again and again. They need to make some changes on defense. Todd Reirden can't be the only, domino to fall this offseason on the blue line. So I think that you run the risk of doing that, but I think that's more so with a guy like P.O. Joseph than it is a guy with like Ryan Shea, because I thought Shea was fine as a injury replacement, right? He was better as a Taylor Fedun part 1 instead of having to go break glass for Taylor Fedun at some point this past season. He played 31 games for the Penguins and he's only 27 years old. So I wouldn't hate if they brought him back, but I do think there needs to be some moves made ahead of him on the depth chart if that is the case.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the current batch of RFAs in the AHL system, Dmitry Simorukov, I know he got an NHL deal and was recalled once, but didn't get NHL time. That boat seems to have sailed. Jack Rathbone could be interesting, entertaining that again for another year or 2 as an option. He's 25. Again, he had those offensive outputs with the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins, but who knows what the organization wants to do with him. Xavier Ouellette's 30, going to be a UFA. That seems to be it. And he never cracked the NHL lineup here, despite maybe getting that opportunity 2 years ago. Just injuries got in the way. And then Taylor Fedun. So that's your batch of UFAs for the minor league system, all of which Taylor Fedun's a right side. The rest of them left defensemen. So there are options there, but what does the organization want to do with them? Obviously not much if they're going out and signing guys from Finland rather than re-signing the in-house names. And that's the other part that makes me think Ryan Shea might be out or on the way out, is that Kyle Dubas went out and found someone. Now, granted, he's in Czechia. Philip Kral is Czech, so maybe he was just kind of there in the connection. But the fact that deal got done, he went out and found someone new before re-signing a guy like Ryan Shea makes at least me believe maybe that's just the end of that.
At the same time, though, Philip Kral is a 1-year, $775,000 contract. I'm sure he's still waiver eligible at 24 years old and having played, I think, 2 National Hockey League games only a handful. 2. Okay.
Yep.
So, I mean, between that and then there's Ryan Shea, who made $775 last season on a 1-year deal, probably wants maybe a little bit more security now. He said, listen, I came up and I played 31 games and it's not like I was out of place, and that was the first NHL action that I had ever seen. So maybe that negotiation's going a little bit more difficult because Shea just wants a little bit more. Or maybe he wants a better opportunity. Maybe he wants somebody to say, hey, you're going to be the 6th guy coming into camp. Then you have to basically lose the job. Maybe he wants that instead of saying, hey, you're going to be an 8th guy, and you are likely not going to be that 6th guy anytime soon. You're just going to have to wait for injuries to get your opportunity again, or you're going to have to sit in the press box. And not everybody's built like Chad Ruhwedel. Not everybody just is fine with sitting in the press box and awaiting their opportunity. But hey, I'm not going to begrudge Chad Ruhwedel because he's made a good career out of it and he's made a lot of money out of it. So shout out to him on that one. But we'll save the P.O. Joseph of it all for a little bit later.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's a long off season, and we've had some discussions on him already. An interesting case for the Pittsburgh Penguins, but let's move over to a segment that we have brought back here called Name That Stat Line. The Penguins, we've talked about it ad nauseum. They could use upgrades in multiple areas. It's interesting when you look at their lineup right now because it's not really holes to fill. You could actually make an argument that they have a lineup ready to ice for next season already. The question just becomes, where do they look for those upgrades? We've talked about, top line wingers a heck of a lot this offseason. Let's go through a few available center options here, specifically for that third line option. And let's start with this player here who had 80 games played, Horwat, 9 goals, 38 assists for 47 points in the 2023-24 season.
Puck mover. 9 goals, 38 assists. That sounds like a defenseman stat.
It does.
Can I get a little bit of help on that?
Yeah, he played alongside a Ted Lindsay Award finalist this season.
Oh, who are the Ted Lindsay finalists?
I was about to say, I thought that would be a very helpful one, but I don't know, because he was a winger with this Ted Lindsay Award finalist, but he could also play third line center.
Okay, I'd say because the Ted Lindsay finalists, I believe, were, now we're testing my knowledge here, Matthews, McDavid, McKinnon?
Yes.
That was right? Okay.
I think either that or Kucherov's in for one of those three.
Ah, right. The MVP, the soon-to-be MVP winner.
Yeah.
Oh, is it whoever plays for the Oilers?
McDavid?
The free agent.
Oh, no, it's not.
Oh, all right. Well, I'm not going to get this one at all. I have not looked into free agents yet at all, but I'm curious to hear after hearing that defensive metric. Curious to know who this is.
That's Max Domi.
Oh, playing with
Toronto Maple Leafs.
Okay.
Yeah, played alongside Austin Matthews. 9 goals this season. He did get off to a rough start, but by the end of the year, he was playing and looking pretty good in the postseason with Austin Matthews and the Toronto Maple Leafs. It's a player that I've mentioned multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
That is my top option for the Penguins, just simply because of the fit and the way that he plays, the style in which he plays. I think would be really good for the Penguins' bottom six and bring it to life a little bit more, because there were some games this season where the Penguins' bottom six was just absolutely lifeless. So I think with Max Domi, the odds of that happening go down tremendously. Not only that, but he is a guy that has some offensive upside to him. He's a guy that I think would fit really well with the Drew O'Connor speed and forecheck ability, go together really well. So I like Max Domi as an option for the Penguins next season. But, that much is known to people that have listened to the show over the last couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm. Also, Max Domi's career is
interesting.
Wild looking at these numbers, because I'm thinking 9 goals. That's got to be a career low, right? Nope. He's done it twice before in back-to-back seasons. And again, put up the same amount of assists.
Mm-hmm.
What a weird player.
Yeah.
Also, he's been in the league way longer than I thought. Holy cow.
Yeah, you forget that he played for Dallas, Carolina, Columbus, I believe, as well.
Arizona at the age of 20 in 2015.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, I had one of those moments today.
29.
I was looking at the free agents. I was like, Pierre-Edouard Bellemare is 39 years old.
Yeah.
That one I couldn't believe, because I was like, I feel like he was like, he's a little bit of older generation as far as, we're in 2024 and his prime was around 2017, but it just felt like he just got onto the scene whenever he was in Vegas. So it was weird. It was weird. But let's move over to the next one. This next player played in 79 games this season, scored 10 goals, had 20 assists for a grand total of 30 points. And I'm just going to give you the hints here the whole way through. He's still playing in the Stanley Cup playoffs today. Was not today, but as of right now. And he was traded at this year's NHL trade deadline. Can you name that stat line, Horwat?
Who did the Panthers acquire? Who did the Rangers acquire? Because you said not today. Narrowing it down a little more. Oh, who did the Rangers get? Did they not get someone?
They did get someone. They got a couple of people at the deadline.
They got Chad Ruhwedel.
Yeah, no. Ruhwedel is not a third line center option in my eyes. Sorry.
No kidding. I'm going to be so bad at this. I can't think of their rosters right now, and the only Panther that's coming to my mind is Sam Bennett, and I know that's not it.
No, it's not Sam Bennett. That one is Alexander Wenberg.
Wenberg, that's who they got.
Formerly of the Seattle Kraken, now of the New York Rangers. Had himself a decent season. 30 points is, again, that's similar to what you saw from, Lars Eller this past season. I think Wenberg has a little bit more upside when it comes to the offensive side of the puck. Obviously, Lars Eller has more when it comes to the defensive side of the puck, so you're going to have to balance that a little bit. But I think that Wenberg, obviously one of the top center options on the market. I think he's, in my eyes, probably a top 4 option. I don't have Lindholm in this list. Let me just spoiler alert. I just don't think I don't think Lindholm is going to come to the Penguins to be a third line center. No. But, outside of Lindholm, these are the top centers available. Wenberg's up there, and that kind of speaks to the strength of the center options at this year's free agency market. But, Alexander Wenberg's the guy that has made himself a pretty nice career and would be a decent depth piece for the Penguins.
Yeah, he was their all-star, right? The Seattle's all-star?
It was either him or Oliver Bjorkstrand. I think it was Bjorkstrand.
Okay. It was Bjorkstrand because I got them confused quite a bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was a good addition for the Rangers, and heading into free agency, that's a good depth option for a number of teams, and the Penguins are included in there considering I think you need to abandon defense a little bit when it comes to the bottom 6. I mean, yeah, they absolutely still have a defensive mindset down there, but for almost 3 straight seasons, just that bottom 6 is not produced for this team. Mm-hmm. They need someone who can be a finisher. They just need one more finisher for the depth. I know it's ideal to have at least 2 on your top 2 lines, but at least a third one for the third line that can finish at least a little more than, what's been given to help boost the offense of this bottom 6. I will continue to die on the hill of finding offense for this bottom 6.
Mm-hmm. Well, this next player is somebody that brought more offense than anybody else we're going to mention in this segment. 75 games played, scored 16 goals this season, had 35 assists for a grand total of 51 points. He is a Stanley Cup champion coming off of a contract where he only made $2.75 million, but spent time as the team's top line center during some of those runs in the playoffs. So can you name that stat line, Horwat?
Cup champion coming off. No, I cannot. I'm not even going to try and think about it. I'm trying to keep good radio here.
That's Chandler Stevenson of the Vegas Golden Knights. I think that's a really interesting option because how does he view himself?
Yeah.
He's clearly been underpaid by the Vegas Golden Knights, but that's simply because that's the contract that I believe he had when he came over from the Washington Capitals. But he was, for a time being, he was their top line center making $2.75 million. And it's not like, obviously their center depth got a lot better whenever they went out and they got a guy like Jack Eichel. But, I'm interested to see how he views himself going into this offseason.
The Vegas Golden Knights and Kelly McCrimmon are the ones that signed that deal. 4 years, $275. That's a sweet deal, though. That's a good piece of work for Kelly McCrimmon. But beyond that, it's his first really big deal, and it's not even that big.
Yeah, and well, here's the thing. You look at his career numbers. That was signed directly after the season that he came over in that trade.
Yep.
He scored 8 goals, 22 points in 40 games after that and looked good in Vegas. And then after that, his numbers shot up. 14 goals, 21 goals, 16 with 2 60-point seasons and obviously a Stanley Cup championship. So he signed a deal that at the time was probably fair, but he certainly far, superseded what he was making over those next 4 seasons.
Yeah, he's going to demand far more than $2 million or $2.75 million, I think. I mean, a couple of 60-goal seasons, 60-point seasons followed by a 50-point season this past year. And it was clear that, like you mentioned, he was a top-line center for this team on multiple occasions. Clearly, he's not that anymore considering the pieces that they've added, and he's still putting up 50 points. He's going to demand, especially he's going to be, I think he is 30 or is going to be 30, could be the big deal for him. He's going to demand a good chunk of money and he's going to deserve it. Might just be out of the Penguins range.
Yeah, as far as a player fit is concerned, him as a third line center would be perfect because, worst comes to worst. If something happens with Evgeny Malkin, he can move up and play top 6 minutes. He's used to doing that for a contender. But like you mentioned, what is the price tag? And more so than that, what is the term? Because the Penguins, I think you're going to see this offseason, are going to be very selective with term, especially going forward. So we'll see what happens with Chandler Stevenson. But I would say behind Max Domi, as far as player fit, I would put Chandler Stevenson right up there is the next one. I think Domi's contract puts him a little bit at a higher level for me, at least in the wish list. Let's close it out with this player. 59 games played, 9 goals, 22 assists, and 31 points for this bottom 6 player. Again, similar, still playing in the Stanley Cup playoffs as of right now. Traded within the Metropolitan Division this season and was rumored to be on the Penguins' radar last season around the NHL's trade deadline.
Okay, who else did the Rangers get?
Exactly.
Jack Roslovic.
That is 100% Jack Roslovic. That's another Rangers trade deadline acquisition that could potentially go to the open market this offseason. You know, not a lot of goal scoring from Roslovic, and the question was, is it because he played for the Columbus Blue Jackets for the majority of his career, or was it because just that's where he's at? I think this is a player that has those offensive instincts, that has that offensive upside, but hasn't been able to really realize it yet at the National Hockey League level, and it's tough to do so after the trade deadline, right? You see some of these players, Michael Bunting, Jake Gensel, be able to just immediately mesh and put up huge offensive numbers. That is the exception and not the rule 90% of the time, right? So Jack Roslovic is a guy that, he brings that defensive impact. He brings that little bit of chippiness to the bottom 6, but he still has that offensive upside. I could see that end up being one of the more likely options for the Penguins when it comes to they're going to look to try to probably upgrade other positions before third line center. So they're not going to have as much money to work with. And I think Roslovic is where you get to that second tier of free agent as far as the center ice position is concerned.
I think so too. And I think I might like this one the most. He's only 27. He's that young UFA. He is that UFA where it's, hey, this is your first year being eligible. And whenever the Penguins are still looking to add youth, I get this guy's not youthful, but is a younger option compared to Max Domi, who, again, has been around forever and is apparently going to be 30. Shocking. But some of his best years were on a very bad Columbus Blue Jackets team. I don't remember how bad the 2021-2022 Columbus Blue Jackets were, but he put up 45 points. And
bad.
And more often than not, like I said before this episode, saying the Buccos are bad is an evergreen statement. You say the same thing about the Blue Jackets for the most part, except for that year they beat the damn Lightning. I'd say this might be my favorite one so far of these options. He might demand a pretty penny, but it might not be he was making $4 million right now. I don't think it can be that considering the last few seasons.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to get that big of a raise. I think you're probably looking at around the same, if not a little bit less, and it all depends on, trade clauses, if that's something that he's interested in, and it all depends on term as well. So, there's a lot that goes into these negotiations. But I think that Jack Roslovic is somebody that could end up being on the Penguins' radar if they end up looking to make this one of their top priorities. Obviously, we've talked about, now they have a little bit less because they made a couple signings. So they probably have around like $11 million, $11.5 million left to spend this offseason. How much do they want to spend on a winger? How much do they want to spend maybe on a defenseman that could play alongside Chris Letang? Do they want to go out there and reinvent their goaltending room? Do they want to make some trades and open up some space with a Riley Smith and his $5 million, Ricard Raquel and his $5+ million. So what ends up being the course of action that determines what they can do on July 1st. But I think that Roslovic is somebody that was on their radar before, and I wouldn't be surprised that even if this is a new front office and hockey operations staff, I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up on their radar as well. But let's move over, finish this episode off by talking about a little bit of news this morning from Rob Rossi of The Athletic. Details a growing relationship between Kevin Acklin and former Pittsburgh Penguin and now, forever immortalized in the rafters, Jaromir Jagr. Says Acklin would like to have Jagr back in the organization in a somewhat permanent capacity, not somebody that's going to, leave Czechia by any means, because he still has responsibilities in his hometown of Kladno, not only owning the team, but playing for the team, but would want him to be, quote, more than just an ambassador, and it would include several visits to Pittsburgh throughout the season. This is only a positive thing for the Penguins if they do strike a deal, correct?
Absolutely. It's good PR. It's good vibes hiring. not even especially if it's not in hockey operations, but just having a name like that within the organization, working under the Penguins name, is a net positive. We hear it all the time with other teams with, these weird hirings of just, this is a guy who's going to be here as an ambassador. They're just ambassador, nothing else. They're here because we're paying them. Penguins have done it a couple times too, actually. I think, I'm not mistaken, Paul Steigerwald is still under a ambassador role after leaving the booth, although still stepping into the booth sometimes. So the Penguins aren't new to this. It's something that they can and that they have done before and can do again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the other thing is too, you want a voice like that around the locker room. You want a voice like that to come in it. And you look at this past season, and as the memories fade of the little minutia of the regular season, what are the biggest moments that stand out? Pretty much everything with Jaromir Jagr, right? That is like the majority of the top 5 moments include Jaromir Jagr, whether it's the bobblehead heist, whether it's, the ceremony in general, whether it's him just going out and practicing with them at the Lemieux Sports Complex, the closest that a lot of people are going to get to be able to see a living legend out there on the ice. To have him coming back multiple times a season, it's only a positive thing. So obviously a good piece of reporting there from Rob Rossi of The Athletic. If you have The Athletic, consider checking that out. It's a solid piece, details kind of where they're at in that relationship, especially as the Penguins and the majority of the front office right now is over in Czechia checking out the World Championships, which a lot of Penguins making it to the knockout stages here. So Erik Karlsson's Swedish team has been an absolute, wagon so far. Team USA has looked a little bit better. Alex Nedeljkovic looking a little bit better after that rocky first start. So now that we're actually into the knockout stages here, should be some pretty interesting hockey as we get down to the nitty gritty here, trying to determine who ends up taking the gold medal. But, at the end of the day, more Jagr is always a good thing for the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Absolutely. That should be where it begins and ends. If they want to give him some sort of European ambassador role, could be entertaining and interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Just making sure that paycheck says Penguins. That's all.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the Pittsburgh Penguins and really the city of Pittsburgh in general. I mean, you look at this week alone, you have the Pirates Hall of Fame with, Manny Sanguillen, Barry Bonds, Jim Leland. You have the Pittsburgh Steelers and a lot of the former Steelers in town for that charity flag football game. You see Big Ben throwing it to the bus. You see, Troy Polamalu flying out there and almost making a mirror image interception of that San Diego Chargers game in the snow where he tried to scoop it up off the ground. Wasn't able to do it this time, but we don't begrudge him for that. But this is a city that is very much in tune with the history of their sports. So obviously this falls right in line with that. And again, even if you weren't alive for the 5 Art Ross trophies, the back-to-back Stanley Cups, you know who Jaromir Jagr is. And that's because this city cares about their historic figures of their sports organizations, and bringing him here more often. Again, 10 out of 10, no matter what they do. I trust Kevin Acklin, especially after the way that he handled Celebrate 68 and what he was able to do at that stage of this season for the Penguins.
Yeah, it was all given that big exclamation point with the jersey retirement ceremony. It all felt perfect. It all felt like everything is back to normal, back to the way it should be, that Jagr is A, in the good graces of the Penguins organization, B, back in town quite a bit, and C, knows that a partnership going forward is very much possible and very much likely at this point.
And mutually beneficial, too. You could see it on Jagr's face. He enjoyed every second of coming back to Pittsburgh this year and really being the guy in town once again, because he was for that couple of weeks in February and March. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Inside the Penguins or anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.